Welcome to today's webcast on the best subdivision design workflow in Civil 3D. My name is Brian Lewandowski. I'm the Civil Product Manager at CTC Software, and I'll be doing the presentation today. What I want to do today is go through a workflow for subdivision design. It's not the only workflow out there, but it is a workflow that we have been working at CTC, among other processes in Civil 3D, we've been working for some time to greatly improve. We have a variety of tools that aid in this workflow, and the point of this webcast is to highlight that entire workflow, where we use native tools and where we might use CTC tools to automate some of that, to end up with a much more efficient process that allows us to make better design decisions as we go along. So that overall process is starting with horizontal layout, moving into road grading, and then lot grading, finally some earthwork calculations. Some of the tools we're going to be highlighting are Label Genie. This is a tool that automates 85% of the labeling in your drawings. Data Wizard that does custom legends and QTO. We're going to use AutoGrader quite a bit, which is rules-based site grading. We're going to use one of our new tools called Earthwork Processor, which is a dynamic variable subgrade depth earthwork calculator. And we'll also use Corridor Mapper a little bit to automate in some of that road grading. Now, I've done past webcasts on all these different tools, different deep dives, specifically on how to use those tools. Okay, today isn't going to be a deep dive on each one of those tools. I want to show a higher level process or workflow, like we said, and how that works across Civil 3D and where we plug in some of these CTC tools. So we've got a lot to show today. I'm going to show most of it live in Civil 3D, but I want to get a bit of a framework within PowerPoint here. So the first one is horizontal layout. And what are the kind of sub-steps within there? We're looking at road alignments, creation of those, laying out our property lines. And we've got a lot of labeling and tabling that we might do. And so I want to highlight some of that and where the CTC tools can fill in there. So what I've done here is I have an initial alignment created. Okay, so I'm not going to go through training how to use alignment tools. I have a right-of-way created. This is just simply polylines at this point. And I have an initial lot layout. Okay. Now, oftentimes one of the kind of painful parts of this process is the labeling processes. So with this stage of the game, okay, it's pretty standard native tool sets are used to create the objects, but the labeling portion is something I want to highlight here. Let's start with just some segment labels. Putting bearing and distance labels on these things is often quite tedious. With one of the tools called Label Genie, instead of having to pick every lot or every line, we can instead label all these lines at once. So I'm going to use Label Genie, and what I've got set up here are some templates, in fact, that will load pre-configured settings. So I've got side lots for bearing and distance. I'm going to load this, and what it's going to do is specify my line type, what I'm going to anchor these to, and then what are my styles. Okay, so in Label Genie, you get to spell out different label types. There's a whole set of them here, virtually all of the AutoCAD and Civil 3D label types, and then a variety of settings on how they attach to things, and you can save those out to templates. You can then quickly load them like I did here. Then it allows us to add these. We'll insert 121 labels at once. Okay, so this is a portion of this this portion of the project, right? It's often pretty tedious with labeling. So we can run that again. Now these templates, they save out to a simple path that you have right in here, and then they load into this combo box. So let's say I've got my front lot distance labels. I'm going to load that. and that's going to label the front of my lots with just distance labels. Okay, now these are all just standard Civil 3D labels. There's nothing magical about these, nothing proprietary. These aren't CTC labels. Okay, but again, instead of having to pick and click, we can automate it. We'll do one more here and then we'll move on. I've got a right-of-way bearing a distance template here. Okay, so if you guys haven't used Label Genie yet, this has been out for a few months in the Sim Project Suite. You should go and take advantage of it. Now you notice some of these came in on the wrong side. Perhaps I wanted that on the road side. When you run Label Genie again, it remembers the last settings. And so, for example, maybe that template, the flip state was wrong. They should have been all flipped. And in that case, I'll run it again, and we should see those labels flip to the inside. So Label Genie will update things as well as add them in the first place. As geometry changes, you can run it again and it'll update it. Now, what's one other thing? This is a feature we've added just in the last month or so to Label Genie. And if you're not using parcel tools, laying out your lot numbers and associated areas becomes a very tedious process. Well, what we've done is provided the ability for you to simply trace out a path that you'd like for your lot labeling. So I'm going to do that. I want one to start down here. I'm going to go around, and then I want it to terminate there. And then I want to start one over again. Perhaps this is considered a separate block. And I'm just going to trace out where would my lot numbering be. So this is my fence of sorts. Okay. Now what I have is a standard company block that has lot number and lot area. Let's open up Label Genie. And I'm going to load another template in here. I'm not going to just run it right away because I want to show it to you. Lot areas and numbers. Okay, let's load this. This is going to insert a label type of blocks anchored on polylines that are on a particular layer. So I have some closed polylines in here as well. And so that's what we're going to use. And we're going to go to the centroid. Now on this tab, when it's Civil 3D labels, it's mostly pick a style and you're kind of on your way. But if it's something like blocks or MText, we can take information like the polyline area and we can add that to a piece of MText. Or if it's a block like this, here's my block label I'm using. There's attributes inside of it, and I can automatically populate those attributes. The formatting on that, do I want to convert it, in this case, to square yards? Do I want a suffix? All those kinds of settings that you would normally see in the native field dialog box, we automate that right in here for you. There's another attribute in here. I've got a counter attribute added, and what this does, I can specify a starting point, an increment, and then I use a filter to grab the polyline that defines my path. Okay, and that's that polyline I drew here on a no plot layer. Okay, so I'm going to hit add to this. It's going to add 125 labels. And these labels, again, are just AutoCAD blocks with attributes in them. So there's lot 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I'm able to do all this without the parcel tools. And while, again, I know a lot of people use them, a lot of people don't because of a number of the oddities. But this was one of the reasons people use them. And so we put this right into Label Genie, so you can take advantage of some of that area calculation and so on. And one other little thing here, often people want to tabulate these lot areas. We can tabulate anything. There's another tool here called Data Wizard. And I'm going to run this just to give you an example of what Data Wizard can do. We can scan any number of drawings for any number of objects. In this case, I'm going to grab blocks. And I'm going to grab blocks that have an object name of lot label. Okay. And then on this tab, what do I want to tabulate? Okay, I want to grab the two attributes from my blocks. Okay, finally on the next tab, I'm going to create an AutoCAD table of this, and we'll insert this right over here. So again, just native AutoCAD tables, AutoCAD objects. We're just automating this process for you. Okay, so just tabulating those areas for us. So just some spots in the horizontal layout workflow that we can speed up with some of the CTC tools, and that's where Label Genie fits into this overall workflow. Well, let's move on to road grading. Okay, typically what we're doing there is we have our horizontal layout done. We're creating road profiles, we're building corridors. Now, a general practice is you build your corridor out to your right-of-way, okay? So in a subdivision workflow, we're gonna use corridors to grade to our right-of-way. Now, I'm not gonna get into detail about how to use corridors, but I wanna highlight one tool that really aids in that. And finally, when we're done with that, we're gonna extract a feature line at the right-of-way of the corridor. I'm gonna talk to that a little bit more in Civil 3D. So let's jump back here. And I've gone a few steps along. I've created some road profiles. I've used a corridor to start modeling my roadway. And one of the things I want to do is target this right-of-way geometry I have right here. And targeting in Civil 3D corridors becomes quite intensive, in fact. And so that's where one of these other tools come into play. Managing these targets becomes quite a bear. Now, you can dive into certainly one region at a time, okay, and I can come in here and I can assign, I can target that polyline, but you do it over and over on all these different regions. And so we have a tool here called Corridor Mapper, and it totally replaces the native target mapping interface. Okay, this is a tool we've had out for a few years. What I'm highlighting here is an update that we're releasing in just a couple weeks, so I thought I would show it off a bit. I also did a deep dive on this a month or two back on a beta version, a pre-release version. So what I've gotten here, I'm on my width and offset tab, so I'm going to manage my width and offset targets. And I just want to look at those subassemblies with the name right-of-way. Okay, and so these are the subassemblies that are going to target that right-of-way. So I've got them all here scattered across all my regions. Now, what Corridor Mapper allows me to do is to pick any subassembly and then dynamically link it to a layer. I can link it to a style. I can link it to object names. Okay, I can do exclusion options up here where it won't find alignments or 3D polylines. I can include or exclude XREFs. Okay, these are some of the expansion items, the enhancements we added to Corridor Mapper in the upcoming release. But the layer linking is something we've already had, and so that's what I want to highlight here. What I can do is grab all of these subassemblies across all these regions, and I can link them again to any of these source objects. I'm going to link them to the right-of-way layer. And what it's going to do is scan that layer for all those objects. And what it's going to do is find that there are targets to be found on each one of those layers. There's 4 polylines, in fact. Okay, so it pulls all those in here. Now I can hit OK to this, and what we're going to see is all of those regions and subassemblies target those right-of-way polylines. So again, lots of different things we can do with Corridor Mapper. This is certainly one of the places that it ties in quite nicely with subdivision grading, because you end up with often fairly complex corridors, lots of targeting going on, multiple corridors perhaps. Okay. Now, before we move on to lot grading, I want to talk a little bit about how do we tie our roads to our lots. And I've seen a lot of different processes over the years, and really people making good arguments for one process or option over the next. What we can do is we can take our corridor and we can extract a feature line, as most of you know, from it. We can pull that right-of-way feature line from it, and then we can build from that and grade outwards. However, here's the problem. When we get into the lot grading, we're going to be using AutoGrade, and we're going to automate a number of these, or virtually all of the lot lines in the pad grading. And to do that, we have to have a sense of left and right side of the right-of-way. Okay, so in this process I'm showing today, instead of extracting a dynamic feature line, and while it might work for some of you in some projects, if you get a project that's looping all over the place and left and right kind of varies across different corridors, you're going to find it easier to instead just use your right-of-way geometry that you drew in your horizontal stage and create a feature line from that and simply pull elevations from the corridor surface. Okay. Now what I do with that, if we run that once, I'll grab these right-of-way polylines, do feature line from objects, and give it a particular style that I might want. Okay, and then I'm going to assign elevations. And here's the key: we want to pull them from a surface, right? Okay, so this is nothing new, not a new process in Civil 3D, been around a long time. But I just want to touch on a couple of the nuances here. Inserting elevation breaks, right? We certainly need more elevation points. I've got one right here and then one way down here. Okay, I need to account for the ups and downs along the road profile right here. Now there's a couple options here. I could insert elevation points along these feature lines after the fact, or if you make sure to manage your frequency in your corridor, you won't end up with too many intermediate grade breakpoints. So I've gone through a few different options on how to do this in the workflow I'm proposing today, and I think this is the best one. So I'm going to insert intermediate grade breakpoints, and it's going to pick up a point at every tin line in that corridor surface. And the balance, I think, is about right, so long as you have the frequency in your corridor set decently well. Looks like I missed something there. Let me show you what we're after here. Again, I don't want to get in the weeds of troubleshooting things here. Okay, it's going to give us something like this. Basically, where the frequency is along our corridor, we're going to get approximately an elevation point every location there. Now, some of you are thinking, well, Brian, what about when my road design goes up or down and it changes? What about those feature lines? Those aren't going to change automatically for me, are they? And the answer is no, they're not going to. You could make them relative to the surface, which makes them move up and down with the surface, but we end up with a circular reference. When we do that, I found some stability issues. So while it's not dynamic, it is quite simple anytime we change our corridor or our road design to grab these feature lines. Here's the process I do. First, select them all with Select Similar, go to Modify, then go to Elevations from Surface. Don't insert at this point. All we're doing here is updating elevations. Grab your corridor surface, and here's the trick. Right here you've got multiple. Click multiple and then do P for previous, and it'll grab that previous selection. It'll grab all the right-of-way geometry you have in your site. So it makes it really quick to update those feature lines. Okay. Now I'm a big advocate of always trying to make a dynamic link between everything, right? And some of you say, well, that, sometimes things are unstable when you do that. Absolutely. To me, this is one of those times. And so I use a separate independent feature line like this for my right-of-way. I target it from the corridor, and then I use that as my baseline for when we grade out our lots. Okay, so two options. I suggest give them a try. You can extract the dynamic feature line, try it that way, see if it works for you. It depends on the project, or do what I'm suggesting here. Let's move on. Let's talk about the meat of some of what we're after today, which is lot grading and earthwork calculations. A common process once we have some preliminary road grading is to grade our side lot lines, and then we move on to building pads. If we want to model the driveways in there to calculate ponding and proper drainage, we can certainly do that. I'm not going to get into that in detail, but we'd want to use conditional subassemblies to have it insert drop curve there. And then I'll show you some detention pond grading. And we're going to use one of the tools we have called AutoGrader, as well as Label Genie, to go through some of that. And then our final stage will be earthwork calculations. Let's jump back to Civil 3D. And what I've done preliminarily here is I've, based on my initial road grading, some of the existing elevations of the existing surface, I've taken some of these lot lines here and I've put them on a few different layers to give me a preliminary guess at what kind of grading pattern I'm going to use for each of these. So over here, I put these on a layer. I'm thinking these are going to be lookout lots, okay? So all I've done is separate these into a few layers. Now you don't need to do that before you do what I'm about to show you, but I did up front here to save some time. Okay, now normally what we would do at this stage, if we were using feature lines to grade our lots, which often are the most flexible and kind of easiest to use, is we'd start inserting elevation points along these lot lines. And a lot of that stuff, it repeats over and over. You might come up a certain distance to a setback in the front of the house, and then maybe just connect back to the back of lot where we have to match into existing. And so I've got a variety of scenarios here. I've got a existing property line where we need to match into in the back, and then I've also, inside the middle of the site, I've got back of lots here where I can control some of that grading depending on how the drainage looks and the earthwork looks. So here's where AutoGrader comes into play. I've got my road grading, I've got my feature lines here, okay. We're going to use these right-of-way lines as basically a baseline to grade out our lots. We want to come from right-of-way and define gradings from there. So I'm going to use AutoGrader. And I've got some things built out already, so I'll explain it to you a bit here. In AutoGrader, if you haven't seen it all before, what we can do is we can create grading families. Now, a grading family might be any number of things. It might be a pond. It might be a certain type of lot lines. It might be a certain type of lot paths. I've defined a few here. Let me dive into one in detail so you can understand what it does. And then we'll kind of move through some of the other grading families to see how the overall process works to grade out this site. So let's jump into this lookout lot lines family. What this is a perpendicular grading family. What it requires is a set one or more parent feature lines. In this case, those are our right-of-way lines. And then I can grab any number of feature lines. In this case, I'm going to grab feature lines that are on a layer called lot lines lookout, okay? So that was some of these lines we saw down here. I've got them on 3 different layers, okay? But there's no grading applied to those lines. They're still ungraded. And what I can say is from that parent feature line, insert a number of grade breakpoints. I can go a distance at a slope. I can go a distance to relative elevation, okay? And there's all sorts of other options here, like hold a slope to the end of it, okay? Now there is a create and grade new option here. And in this case, AutoGrader will actually lay out your lots as well. I'm showing you the more common workflow where you've got your horizontal design completed already. Perhaps it's some polylines, and now you need to start applying grades. So, but AutoGrader will do either. It'll lay out lots, much like you would do with the parcel tools. It'll handle varying depths. So those of you who are doing that part of the process, certainly encourage you to check that out. Now, inside a grading family, we spell out what it's going to do to these feature lines. We also control the styling, including the feature line style, the layer, and the site that these feature lines will be put into. So all of that is managed in the grading family. So I'm going to hit save here. And the final thing it does is it also manages our break lines in our surface. So I can specify a surface as well as supplementing factors to control the triangulation in that surface. And you can see all of these I've already got set to lots finish grade. So I'm going to grab this lookout lot lines. I'm going to click run on this. We get a little status bar because what we're doing is we're grading out many feature lines at once, and then we're taking all those feature lines and we're adding them into a surface for you. Now this is a first time run on these, but you can run this stuff over and over. So let me close this out and let's take a look at some of these lookout lines. These are all the yellow ones here. I preliminary guessed at which one should be lookout. Okay, and here's those 3 grade breaks I had spelled out in my grading family. Now, if some of these other ones should have been lookouts, okay, let's do this one. So let's grade a few more of these lots, and then we can take a look at it, get a sense of the grading pattern there. We'll put some labels on it, and then we'll make a decision, well, should these be walkouts or basements or what have you? Okay, so we want to control that lot grading depending on what type of building pad we might put there. So I'm going to go back in here, the auto grader. You see I've got some of these other families loaded. Now, just like Label Genie, you saw how I had those templates, right? And we could call those up and execute them at any point. Auto grader is the same thing. So like when I started this drawing, I went out and I browsed to my standard templates for basement lot grading, basement pads, and all of those I can open and load right into here. So you can easily take a certain design and bring it from one project to the next. So let's grab the walkout lines, we'll run those. Now this is a different grading pattern. Notice we get a preview down here. It's just kind of a visual of what it's gonna do to those feature lines. And then we're also going to run the basement lot lines. Now the only difference with these and the lookout and the walkout, besides the geometry itself, is we're referencing a different set of feature lines. The other ones I had, I'm looking for a layer called lot lines walkout or lot lines lookout. Okay, now I could reference by style or site. There's a lot of different ways to do this depending on your preference. Okay, but that's how these families know which lot lines to grade. And run the basement lot lines. Now maybe you don't call them by the pad type. I was just doing that for kind of simplicity. Call it whatever you want, type 1, type 2, but we're grading the lot lines and we certainly want to apply some different gradings on those. Now I'm inserting grade break points along these lot lines, and then because I only inserted a little ways down the lot line, what's happening with the back of the lot lines here? Let's take a look at that before we move on. Okay, I've got an existing property line out here, and that has elevations pulled from existing ground, okay? Now these lot lines are intersecting that. They're terminating right there. That's how I drew them. And so the slopes of these feature lines will vary depending on that back lot. So that's a slope of 1.08% there. I get 8.21, so on and so forth, okay? And so part of the workflow here to use AutoGrader in this way when we're grading these lot lines is we have to think about what do we want to control. On the front of the lot, I want right-of-way control to control. On the back, in this scenario where I'm tying into existing, I want that existing property line to control. And so I want to highlight a key Civil 3D concept that is important when using AutoGrader. I've got a style named existing to this, assigned to this one. To all my lot lines, I have styles assigned called lots. And then on my right-of-way, I've got a style assigned called right-of-way. If you haven't heard about it before, there's a concept called feature line style hierarchy. And again, it plays very well into what we're doing with AutoGrader. On the Options tab of the properties of your feature lines within your site, you can specify when two feature lines cross and they have a different style, which ones control. This is huge for AutoGrader, because if we're going to automate a lot of these lot gradings, we're not necessarily wanting to control the back of lot in this case. I want that to just float with whatever the back of lot is going to be, or basically stick to it in this case of an existing feature line. Okay, so I've got existing, which is this outer blue line, then the right-of-way lines, those control, and then the back of lot lines, I'll show you that in a minute, and then the lot lines, those are last, meaning the ends and the starts of these lot lines are always going to stick to those feature lines so long as they're crossing. A very important concept. Here are those back of lot lines. I've given it some preliminary grades right now, but as I grade out these lots here, I can come to this back of lot line and I kind of move that up and down as I see fit to match some of that grading. All right, now we said, okay, we threw a bunch of preliminary lot gradings on there. What do I have? What am I working with? Some of this looks like they're too steep, right? I need to be able to kind of change my grading, but AutoGrader does it all at once for me, okay? Now to aid in this, let's go ahead and put some lot labels on here. And here's where Label Genie comes in again. Remember all those line labels and lot labels we were doing? Well, now we want surface spot elevation labels. I go up here to my lot spot elevations. I'll load that template, and it's going to set this to surface spot. It's going to set my feature lines as my anchor object, and then it's going to find layers that start with underscore lot. My surface, it's going to look for a surface called lot FG. Okay, you don't have to actually specify a surface. You can just leave it blank, and it'll find the first surface that it returns, that Civil 3D returns to it. And then over here, how do I want to style this thing? What kind of spot elevation style? What kind of marker style? How am I going to orient this thing? All of that stuff saves again to my template. So I'm going to click Add to this, and we can start getting a sense of our lot labels, or the lot elevations, by inserting spot elevation labels. So 549 labels it's going to insert across all these lot labels. And all I did was grab the layers, these 3 different layers that these lot lines are on, so that I can see what I'm working with. And I wonder if I've got a layer turned off. There we go. Getting ahead of myself here. Sometimes showing this a long workflow like this in Civil 3D, it's like building this big house of cards to just kind of execute in front of you guys all at once. So apologize for any kind of little mishaps I have there. Okay, these were the lot labels I inserted. They're just Civil 3D surface spot elevation labels attached to vertices along those lot lines. And now I can look at these and start to get a sense of them and what my lots are doing. And I can do the same, of course, for slope labels. I've got that in here. My lot slopes will load that and add 429 labels at once. Now you noticed we had some of those extra labels in there. I just selected similar, deleted them all. This is kind of the beauty of Label Genie, is that it will insert or treat your sets of labels as like one object, right? You don't have to pick and click anymore. You can insert all these at once. Now, if you put any of these things in drag state, it will respect that. Label Genie won't change that, because you can run Label Genie and it will update things for you automatically. And we can take a look at this. Let's just bump our scale up a little bit, get some bigger labels. And if we don't like some of these slopes we have here, so these right here are set to my walkout standard, okay? So maybe these 3, and this is the process, this is the key point here. This is how you use AutoGrader to go through your kind of iterative process of deciding what kind of grading patterns are applied to different areas of your site. I had set walkouts here, but it didn't work. It's too too steep back here. And so I'm going to grab these. I'm going to put these on the lot lines basement layer. Oh, not lot pads. Lot lines basement. Now when I do that, nothing happens to the geometry itself. I just change layers, okay? But now that set of feature lines is going to get caught in, guess what? The basement lot lines family. That's this one right here. This is a dynamic family. There isn't a finite set of feature lines. This said 51 before, now it says 54 because it found 3 more of them based on the layer filtering I have here, okay? So I'm going to save this. I'm going to click Run on basement lot lines. It's going to go through them again, okay? Now there's a lot of basement lot lines out there, and it needs to check every single one of them to make sure they're graded appropriately. This one's particularly slow this time. There we go, now it's processing. And if you'd seen these update down here, right? Now we don't have those steep slopes into the back of the lot or the back of the house, okay? I still don't have preferred drainage, but I'm looking a lot better than I was before, okay? That applies across your whole site, okay? Throw labels on here. Take a look at your lots, what kind of drainage, stuff too steep. But what about areas where, well, that lot drainage is fine, but I want to put a backyard swale through here. Okay, AutoGrader doesn't force you into just working with, you know, the feature lines it manipulates. This is a standard surface, and it simply adds standard break lines to it. Now you can do anything you want with this. Now here's how you handle something like putting a swale in here. Draw in the geometry of your swale, okay? Make a feature line out of it. Pull elevations from your proposed surface, and the key here is the style, right? The style for this feature line needs to be a higher ranking one than the lot lines. It's this feature line style hierarchy again, okay? Perhaps you have one other style in here called swale, okay? And what it means is that whatever AutoGrader does, if this feature line is crossing those lot lines and it has a higher ranking style, it's always going to force that swale in there, okay? So use supplemental feature lines like this wherever you need to get the proper grading. Now, some of your lot lines, you might be like, well, you know, most of my lots, they fall in and they work for 3 or 4 different design standards in AutoGrader, but maybe there's just a few that you want to design or grade manually, okay? So if you want to basically pull it out of the control of AutoGrader, you just put it on a different layer. Have a layer called Lot Lines Manual, for example, and now this particular feature line, while it got its initial grading from AutoGrader, next time I rerun the Lookout lot family, that's not going to get updated, right? Because AutoGrader will override the gradings you assign to those feature lines. So if you make a manual edit to this one here, change this, and then you go and run AutoGrader again, it's going to trump those slopes, those changes you made there. So if you want to basically pull something out of the standard, put it on a different layer, or give it a different style, any of those formatting options, put it in a different, you know, if you're referencing it by description, you can give it a different description, all kinds of options there. I'm not going to go through in detail here, but I mentioned driveways, okay? So we want to use conditional subassemblies to put in dropped curb at perhaps the high sides of our lots, right? I'm not going to go through that in detail here. I've got other videos that show you how to use Corridor Mapper to do that. But this would be roughly the stage we want to be doing that. Now, at any point, if something changes here, my design can update with it. So what does that process look like? Let's say this road right here, this is a Blueberry, the profile is going to change. I already know I'm going to have too much cut, for example. Let me make this change like this. Okay. Now, most of you know if you have a corridor built on that, you can just simply rebuild that corridor. So we'll do that. We'll pick this corridor. Okay, that rebuilds. Okay, and this is the corridor east surface. So next thing I want to do is grab those feature lines. I'm just going to grab the two that are right here. These are my right-of-way lines. Remember, these are basically my baselines for my lot grading. Now again, you can do the dynamic link feature line. I found it's better to keep it independent. Simply grab the feature lines you want to update, then go to the Modified tab, Elevations from Surface, pull Elevations from Corridor East, hit OK, and then we do M for Multiple and P for Previous. It's going to update the elevations on those feature lines. Okay. Now that brought up the right-of-way lines, right? Might have seen some contour adjustments there. From here, all we need to do is adjust or refresh our grading families. I'm going to just do it on this side here. These are walkouts specified here. I'm going to go into AutoGrader. I'll grab my walkouts family and simply run that walkout lot lines family again. We see some of the contours updating. Close out. Okay. So that's how quick it can be to update your lot lines based on your road grading. Okay. Let's talk about house pads or the building pads. It's getting a little busy out here. I'm going to we're going to turn this surface off. Okay. I think we all understand with AutoGrader it'll automatically add feature lines into our surface. Okay, let's move on to some pad grading. We have another type of grading family in AutoGrader, and it takes advantage of templates. I can spell out different house pads that I have here, and I can have it insert those based on settings I have in that family. So let's take a look at that. What does that look like? We were working with perpendicular families. That's grading lot lines that are perpendicular. By the way, it doesn't have to be perpendicular. It'll grade along skewed lot lines too. And then let's take a look at our Lookout Pads family. What I've got in here is a filter grabbing my 4 right-of-way feature lines. And then I'm going to insert this lookout feature line right here. This is a rectangle with the pad designed as I have as a breakpoint at the midpoints on the side. I'm going to insert that. Okay, I snapped to a midpoint on that or an insertion point on there. And then I've got some parameters to relate it. Now, depending on your lots, depending on how you drew your right-of-ways, these numbers may be different. Okay, but how does it know where to insert those? There's a couple options. We can simply go into stations here and manually spell out stations where it should insert those. We can have it insert at intervals. Or if you've got lot lines, we've got a few options there. We can go in here where it says feature line intersections, and I can say at the midpoints between all the intersections, which is like right there, count that as a station value. And I can say only do it for intersections with feature lines on this layer. So those are my lookout lot lines, okay? Now, people base their elevations on their pads and a lot of different things. It's common to base it on a certain point on the side lot line, okay? But part of the issue here is that the orientation of those pads comes up from the right-of-way. So that's what we're doing initially here. We're gonna insert those pads based on right-of-way so we get the proper orientation and it gets centered in the lots. And then using some analysis tool or just simply looking at our labels, we're able to see, do I have that minimum drainage away from the house? I've got a few ideas on a few other features I want to add into AutoGrader that'll kind of automate some more of that. But for right now, we're going to insert from right-of-way. So I'm going to save, close out of this. We'll come back here and I'll just click Run. And it's going to insert those lookout lines wherever it's finding lookout intersections. Okay. Again, it controls the formatting in there. So initially it's grabbing the current layer, but it's forcing those to go on the lookout pads layer. Okay. And then if I had set the surface, it will set it, put those pads in the surface as well. Okay. So it's as straightforward as that. Now, if this changes, as this changes, if the pad design were to change, okay, everything is based on this right here. So simply running that family again, lookout pads, you'll see an update to all these pads to match that new family. Okay, any parameters in the family, if I change those, right, once I get to my earthwork stage and I'm trying to balance my earthwork, I may want to make changes, not necessarily the pad size, but maybe the height of the pad and the lot in the first place. Okay. Now this deciding which pad goes on which lot, again, is based on layering. In this example here, it's finding intersection between lookout lot lines, which are these yellow ones, and the right-of-way. So if I change some more of these to be lookout lot lines, it would insert more building pads there. It's similar for the other pads here. Let's run the Walkout Pads family. This one is nearly identical. It's simply grabbing a different pad design. This one's got 38 lots to run it on. I'm going to run that. You're going to see those walkout building pads start showing up here. Now, AutoGrader is doing a lot of work for us. But at the end, again, I want to make a point. They're just standard feature lines that are being inserted. And you can take and edit those however you want after the fact. What we're trying to do is get you 90% there, automate 90% of it, because so much of it is kind of rules-based, right? For example, this is based on right-of-way, so it thinks the pad should be there, right? We know that that one's not right. A simple move of that pad is necessary, okay? There's always those kind of independent decisions you need to make in certain areas. And so you're free to do that with AutoGrader. If you want to continue to refresh grading families, you can do that. Just be aware of manual overrides you might have made on those lot lines or anything else. And if you don't want those to be updated, just make a layer or style change so your grading families don't grab or pull in your overridden feature lines, right? Now I'm running this. Some of you might think this is kind of slow. There's a ton of feature line work happening all at once. I've got 5 drawings open. I'm running this on a 15-inch laptop, and I've got 2 4K monitors running on that. So, you know, there's certainly processing time that takes is required there, but compare it to doing that stuff all manually. I'm going to touch on one other thing, and then we're going to jump to some earthwork calculations. There's a third type of grading family, and we're going to use that on this pond grading. So what I've done is I've inserted an initial top of pond here. And in AutoGrader, what I have is a pond family. And this is a third type. It's called parallel. And what this does is it creates 3D offsets using that standard 3D offset command, but you get to basically program a whole set of 3D offsets, inwards or outwards from the parent feature line, okay? And it's pretty straightforward. I click run on this, and it creates those offset feature lines for me, puts them on the layers that I've specified, and save and close out of it, okay? So the focus here was subdivision, but obviously that works great with parking lots and commercial scenarios as well. Now you want a swale running right from here up to here. Draw it in just like we did a backyard swale down here, okay? Give it a style that will either move up and down as the pond moves up and down, or to force a cutaway in the pond. Other things we had here was we had our back of lot line. Send this to the back. This feature line, okay. This has got a style called back of lots. I can manipulate that to control the slopes on the back of the lots here, okay. So that's the overall process we're going for here, okay. Now let me move to Earthwork and kind of pull my baked cake out of the oven here. Again, to be able to get through this in an hour, I kind of got to do some things ahead of time, but those processes I was just showing you, that's what we've carried out here. I'd also done a few other things. You might have noticed, like right here, well, where's the lot right there? Now we did this based on intersections, midpoints between intersections. So right here, it didn't find an intersection between two common lot line types, and nor does it know what to put there. So there you might make a decision, what kind of lot, what kind of house pad might I put there? Now I can throw labels on this stuff as well. I can start looking at those elevations, comparing them to the lot lines, make sure I have proper drainage away. What I'm a big fan of is run a surface analysis, right? Do that in your surface properties. Run a surface analysis here and have it flag everything that's between 0 and 2%. And then you can make decisions on those areas. So earthwork, how do we calculate earthwork across a site like this? It's often a very tedious process for us. I've got different pre-grades or hold downs in my roadway versus my different lot types. Perhaps I'm 2 feet in my roadway. In my basement lots, I'm approximating with a 1.5 foot hold down. Lookouts, perhaps 1 foot or 3/4 foot, whatever your guys' standard is, right? We've got all these different areas that have different hold downs, and we're after a subgrade surface with a variable depth. That's where this third tool comes into play. I've highlighted in a previous webcast where we did a deep dive, but I want to just plug it in here and so you can see how it works. Now what I've done ahead of time, I'm going to go ahead and freeze some layers here, is I have simple polylines drawn that represent different areas or different hold downs across my site. Here were those basements. Here were some more basements, okay? Now, some of you might be familiar with a manual process where you create these and you make a number of surfaces. We're gonna do some of that here, but it's gonna all be taken care of for us. It's really the kind of the most dynamic way to do it and accurate way to do it, but it's a very tedious and actually quite confusing process for a lot of users, especially if they're newer to Civil 3D. So it starts with simply creating your polylines. And one key thing here is because these polylines are going to be put into a surface, they can't be overlapping. You just need little gaps between them. And so running stepped offsets really aids in that. So let's go back. Let's turn all of our layers on again. Get rid of a few again. And we're going to use Earthworks Processor to calculate and then tabulate our earthworks. So if you haven't seen this, we released this about 3 weeks ago. This is Earthworks Processor. I've got a couple Earthworks sets in here. I'm going to delete them out. We'll start from scratch on this one. I'm going to create a new Earthworks set. And the way this works is you select your proposed surface, your existing surface, subdivision EG. By the way, my FG surface is a composite of my lot surface pasted into it, and then my corridor surface is pasted second, so that in those overlap areas that the road triangulation will control. Because certainly the triangulation in that lot surface would have triangulated across the road, but it would have just gone flat from right-of-way to right-of-way. Okay, if you paste your road surface second, that will trump, and the road triangulation will control in that area. Okay, now what I need to do is select those regions I had drawn out here. Now I can select them by hand, or if I've got some filtering or styling set up, I can easily pull those in automatically. And what we're going to see is those show up right here. It's actually going to pull the layer and bring them in like this. And you notice there's a number of elevations or subgrade depths specified here, okay? And some of them might, doesn't look like any of them are right. So it reads the elevation from the polyline. Now, if that's not correct, what we can do is we can override it right here. So say those were supposed to be 1.5, lookouts were to be, okay? Now you can set this ahead of time, or you can just simply put them in right here. So it's overriding it, if you will. It's not writing it to the polyline quite yet, but it'll do it as soon as we run this. Now these are polylines that we're using, but we could certainly do feature lines if there's variable depths to our subgrade. Should have had these done ahead of time for you guys, unless you enjoy watching me type in elevations. Okay, so whatever those depths are, we're typing those in, or we're setting them to the polylines ahead of time. Okay, now this is an imperial foot-based drawing. It certainly works in metric, obviously. So if you're in Canada and Europe, all of this, all these tools are universal in that way. Might be wrong on a couple of numbers, but you guys get the idea here. There's another one of my roads, and then this last one here, 1.5. Okay, so I've set those. My cuts and fills say out of date. When I click run, what Earthwork Processor is going to do is going to create a bunch of surfaces. Now it flagged me right here. I've got something on a locked layer, so I'm going to close out of here and go check that. Yeah, that guy right there. So go back into Earthwork Processor. Now I'm going to run this again. Now what it's going to do is going to create a few different surfaces in the background, and the result is going to be a subgrade surface, or a hold down surface with variable depth based on these different depths for these different regions here. Okay, it's going to calculate cuts and fills of that subgrade surface compared to existing and get me cuts and fills per region in this way. Okay. Looks like I've got some of my elevations off there. Yeah, a couple of them off here, but I think you get the idea here. Okay. Now the way this works is as you change this stuff, if it's changed, right, it's going to say out of date, but you can simply run it again and it'll refresh. Okay. The subgrade surface it's creating is based on finish grade. It's based on finish grade and those polylines. So the elevation of those polylines dictates our hold down depth. So if you change any of those, if you change the shape of any of those polylines, those will update as well. Let me show you what's being made in the background here, and then we'll wrap things up here. If I look at my surfaces here, it's making a surface folder. It's making a depth surface, and then ultimately a subgrade surface. This is the surface with depths that are, it's linked to finish grade, but it's brought down a depth based on those polyline depths. And then ultimately we get an earthwork volume surface, which contributes to those individual cuts and fills, okay? Now, like I was showing you, we go and change road designs, we change lot designs, okay? I simply come back to here at any point, I can rerun this, and if anything changed on finish grade, it'll update in time. I didn't have time to show you here, but this will handle stripping depth as well. And if your stripping depth is not relatable to your proposed regions where you have different hold downs here, you can build a separate second earthwork set where you generate basically an existing subgrade surface. That would be your stripping surface, and you'd simply assign that right here. Now we can take this information, we can look at it. Obviously, we have way too many cuts. We need to bring our roads, our lots up, okay? Once you have this information, you can take it, you can put it out into an AutoCAD table. I'll tabulate everything for me. You can put it out to Excel. Okay, here's that table. Got it on a dash layer here, but I'm getting all those cuts and fills coming out. Okay, I can write this out to Excel right here. And then what I'm writing, it's highly customizable. What information shows up in those tables, all of that's right here. If I look at the cut value itself, I can dive into it and decide what units, cubic meter, okay? So on and so forth. Different regions using different decimal characters, all of that stuff is accounted for in here, okay? So that's Earthworks Processor. Those 5 tools are gonna aid you in helping you really speed up your subdivision design processes. So with that, I'm gonna conclude here with a couple items, and then I'll get to any questions that we might have had here. If you're not familiar with the CTC Civil tools, they're all part of what we call the Sim Project Suite. That has been available for a few years. These are some of the new tools and updated features that we've added recently. That new corridor mapper is going to be out in just a few weeks. If you are current license holders, just run the new installer, and you'll get these new updates if you don't have these new tools I was highlighting today. So if you don't own the Sim Project Suite, you can go to ctcsoftware.com, or in the US, contact ATG. They are our exclusive US reseller, and in Canada, contact SolidCAD. Thanks again, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you at the next webcast.